They called him a culinary genius, a man who built an empire with nothing but ambition, talent, and a relentless drive for success. His restaurants were among the most sought after in the country, his cookbooks flew off shelves, and his face was a familiar presence on television screens, charming audiences with his warmth and passion for food. He wasn't just a chef, he was an icon. But behind the glossy magazine covers and five-star dishes was a secret so sinister, so unimaginable, that when the truth finally surfaced, it sent shockwaves through the world. It started with whispers, former employees vanishing without a trace, quiet settlements swept under the rug, and rumors of something darker lurking beneath the surface of his success. For years, these stories remained nothing more than murmurs in the shadows, dismissed as baseless gossip. After all, how could a man who dedicated his life to feeding people be capable of such horrors? But one woman refused to ignore the signs. His wife, the woman who had stood by his side, who had loved and supported him, began to dig into his past. What she uncovered was more terrifying than she ever imagined. And when she confronted him with the truth, she never could have predicted what would happen next. By the time authorities pieced together the full extent of his crimes, it was too late. The damage had already been done. His fans, his followers, and even those closest to him were left grappling with the horrifying reality: everything they thought they knew about him was a lie. What turned this celebrated chef into a cold-blooded killer? How did he manage to keep his darkest secrets hidden for so long? And what really happened the night his wife discovered the truth? Before we uncover the shocking details of this case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales of love, lies, and unthinkable betrayal. Elijah Langston was the kind of man people admired. At 43, he had built an empire on hard work, charm, and an undeniable gift for the culinary arts. His restaurants, known for their innovative take on soul food, were booked out months in advance. His best-selling cookbook flew off the shelves, promising home cooks a taste of luxury with a southern twist. And his reality TV show? A hit. He wasn't just a chef, he was a brand, a household name, a man who had seemingly mastered the perfect recipe for success. People loved his story. The struggling young cook who clawed his way out of poverty, turning a dream into a multimillion-dollar business. The philanthropist who never forgot his roots, making headlines for feeding the homeless and mentoring at-risk youth. Elijah Langston wasn't just celebrated, he was revered. A symbol of what was possible when talent met determination. And then there was Naomi. At 36, she was stunning, sophisticated, and sharp as a blade, a force in her own right. As an investigative journalist, she had exposed corruption, unearthed hidden scandals, and built a career on uncovering uncomfortable truths. But when she met Elijah, her world shifted. Their connection was instant, magnetic. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered, confident but not arrogant, powerful yet deeply affectionate. Within a year, she left journalism behind to stand by his side, helping to manage and expand his growing empire. Their wedding was a spectacle, the kind of extravagant affair that made headlines. Lavish, elegant, dripping with luxury, every detail curated for perfection. They were Houston's golden couple, a stunning power duo with the world at their feet. Fans adored them. Social media was flooded with glimpses of their life together, romantic getaways, behind-the-scenes footage from Elijah's restaurants, candid moments that seemed to capture a love most could only dream of. But perfection is a carefully crafted illusion. Naomi had always prided herself on her instincts. Her ability to read between the lines, to sense when something wasn't quite right. And though Elijah had given her no reason to doubt him, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, that gnawed at the back of her mind. The way he would deflect certain questions about his past. The business trips that never quite added up. The lingering sense that there was something just out of reach, that he wasn't telling her. She wanted to believe she was overthinking it. After all, Elijah had given her no reason to doubt him. But if there was one thing she had learned from her years as a journalist, it was this: the most dangerous secrets are the ones buried beneath the most beautiful lies. And Naomi was about to find out just how dark those secrets could be. It started with a strange message from an anonymous source. At first, Naomi barely gave it a second glance. She was used to receiving messages about Elijah, fans gushing over his recipes, restaurant hopefuls begging for mentorship, even the occasional critic accusing him of selling out. But this one was different. The words felt urgent, desperate. A young man claiming to have once worked for Elijah sent her disturbing allegations. Elijah had a history of preying on young male employees at his restaurants, promising them mentorship only to lure them into twisted power games. Naomi's first instinct was denial. It had to be a lie. People made up stories about celebrities all the time, and Elijah's success had certainly made him a target. She shut down the thought as quickly as it came. But then, another message arrived. And another. Different names, different details, but the same horrifying story. She found herself reading them late at night, scrolling through the words as her stomach twisted into knots. The men described how Elijah would take them under his wing, offer guidance, and promise connections. He made them feel special, chosen. Until one day, the dynamic would shift. The favors would come with conditions. The pressure would start. The manipulation, the coercion. Some tried to walk away. Others weren't given a choice. Still, Naomi tried to convince herself it was just a smear campaign. People were jealous of Elijah. They wanted to see him fall. But something about the accusations gnawed at her, a whisper in the back of her mind that wouldn't quiet down. It wasn't just one person. It wasn't just one accusation. And the way they told their stories, it was too similar. Too specific. Her instincts, the same ones that had made her a formidable journalist, told her there was more to this. She needed proof. She started digging, reaching out to old contacts, people with access to records that weren't meant to be found. What she uncovered made her blood run cold. Over 2 decades ago, when Elijah was in his early 20s, he had been accused of sexually assaulting multiple underage boys. The cases had never gone to trial. The records were sealed. But the evidence, hidden deep in legal archives, told a chilling story. The charges had mysteriously vanished. Some victims recanted. Others disappeared from public record altogether. There were whispers of payoffs, threats, powerful connections working behind the scenes to make sure Elijah walked away unscathed. Naomi's hands shook as she scrolled through the old case files. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't jealousy or a smear campaign. This was something far worse. And then, she found something even darker. Some of Elijah's former employees hadn't just left his restaurants. They had vanished. No forwarding addresses, no new jobs, no trace of them online. It was as if they had been erased. The realization hit her like a freight train. Elijah wasn't just a manipulator. He wasn't just a predator. He was something much worse. And she was married to him. Naomi uncovered something far worse than sexual abuse. Something that made her stomach churn and her hands tremble as she sifted through old records, police reports, and employment files. Some of Elijah's former employees hadn't just quit, they had vanished without a trace. It started as a gut feeling, an eerie pattern she couldn't ignore. Young, ambitious male chefs who had worked under Elijah would mysteriously disappear. There were no formal resignations, no social media updates about new jobs, no contact with old colleagues. They would simply cease to exist, often leaving behind their belongings, their last paychecks uncollected. She dug deeper. No missing persons reports had been filed by family members. At first, that struck her as odd, until she realized why. Elijah had targeted a specific type of employee. Young men who were estranged from their families, struggling financially, or had no close relatives to report them missing. It was deliberate. It was calculated. Then, she found the most horrifying detail of all, a police report from 5 years prior. A dishwasher at one of Elijah's restaurants had accused him of sexual harassment and attempted assault. The young man had gone to the police, shaken and terrified, detailing how Elijah had cornered him after hours. But before the case could gain traction, before charges could be filed, the young man disappeared. The investigation was closed due to lack of evidence. Naomi's chest tightened as she matched that case to another missing employee from 3 years before that. And another before that. Different cities. Different restaurants. Different victims. But the pattern was unmistakable. Elijah wasn't just a predator. He was a serial killer. The realization sent a cold chill down Naomi's spine. She began looking at his restaurants through a different lens, recalling details she had once ignored. Elijah often bragged about how his kitchens wasted nothing, how he had built an empire on sustainability, how every scrap had a purpose. His chefs followed his rules without question, trained to discard certain things in very specific ways. His restaurants had industrial meat grinders, large-scale freezers, and access to disposal methods that wouldn't raise suspicion. A sickening thought crept into Naomi's mind. Was this how he had covered his tracks? Was this how no bodies had ever been found? Naomi sat frozen at her desk, her heart pounding in her chest. The man she had married, the man the world adored, had built his empire on something far darker than talent and ambition. He had been hiding in plain sight for years, his crimes buried beneath Michelin stars and glowing headlines. She knew she had to act fast. If Elijah even suspected that she was uncovering the truth, she could be his next victim. Elijah stood at the sleek granite countertop of their penthouse kitchen, humming softly as he seared a perfectly marbled Wagyu steak. The scent of butter and rosemary filled the air, an aroma that would have once made Naomi's mouth water. But tonight, she barely noticed it. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, her fingers tightening around the stack of papers in her hands. She placed them on the counter, right beside his cutting board. The sound of paper slapping against the cold stone made Elijah pause. He turned, wiping his hands on a pristine kitchen towel, his signature smile still lingering on his lips, until he saw what was in front of him. His face was drained of color. Page after page of damning evidence. Testimonies from his former employees. Sealed police reports she was never supposed to have access to. Hush money transactions proving that Elijah Langston, the beloved chef, the philanthropist, the mentor, was a predator and a murderer. Naomi folded her arms. Say something. Elijah's mouth opened, but no words came out. He reached for the papers with a trembling hand, skimming the words as if he could somehow erase them from existence. You're a monster, Naomi said, her voice shaking, but firm. I'm going to the police. Elijah looked up at her, and for the first time in their marriage, she saw real fear in his eyes. No regret. No shame. Just pure, unfiltered terror. The carefully constructed persona he had built over the years was crumbling, and he knew it. No, he whispered, shaking his head. Naomi, you don't understand, I understand perfectly. She pulled out her phone. And I'm not giving you the chance to explain. Elijah moved fast. Too fast. 1 second, Naomi was pressing the numbers on her phone, and the next, she was being yanked forward. The device flew from her hands, clattering across the floor. She barely had time to react before he slammed her head against the marble countertop. Pain exploded through her skull. Dazed, she stumbled back, her vision swimming. But she wouldn't go down that easily. Naomi clawed at his face, her nails raking deep scratches across his cheek. Elijah grunted in pain but didn't let go. His grip tightened, his breath ragged with something dark, something animalistic. He shoved her again, harder this time. Naomi crashed against the kitchen island, her knees buckling beneath her. As she struggled to get up, Elijah grabbed the closest thing within reach. A cast iron skillet. The same skillet that had made him famous. The same one he had used on national television, dazzling audiences with his culinary genius. Now, he raised it high above his head. "Don't do this," Naomi gasped, holding up a weak hand in defense. But it was too late. The first blow landed with a sickening crack. Naomi's body jerked, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Blood splattered across the white marble, staining the perfection of their dream home. Then came the second blow. And the third. Elijah struck her over and over, his breathing heavy, his mind blank. By the time he stopped, Naomi was no longer Naomi. She was a lifeless heap on the kitchen floor. Blood dripped from the skillet, pooling around his feet. Elijah staggered back, his chest rising and falling in sharp gasps. For the first time in his life, he had no plan, no way to spin this. The woman who had loved him, the woman who had once defended him against the world, was gone. And he had killed her. Elijah stood over Naomi's lifeless body, his chest rising and falling in ragged, uneven breaths. His hands trembled, still gripping the cast-iron skillet that had caved in her skull. Blood dripped from its edge, pooling on the floor, seeping into the grout between the tiles. The scent of iron mixed with the remnants of the Wagyu steak he had been preparing just moments before. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply stared at what he had done. The woman he had once loved, the only person who truly knew him, lay crumpled on the kitchen floor, her face unrecognizable from the force of his blows. Her blood had splattered onto the pristine white marble countertops, the walls, even onto his own face. He could taste it on his lips. Then, in a chilling display of detachment, Elijah calmly set the skillet down, turned on the faucet, and began washing his hands. The warm water ran red as he scrubbed, the soap lathering into pink foam. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. This wasn't the first time he had to clean up a mess. He picked up his phone and, without hesitation, called his attorney. "We have a problem," he said, his voice eerily steady. "I need you to be ready." Then, he got to work. First, he wrapped Naomi's body in thick layers of industrial plastic wrap, just as he had done with others before. His technique was precise, layer after layer, ensuring there would be no leaks. Then, he double-bagged her in heavy-duty trash bags, securing them tightly with zip ties. The hardest part was moving her. She was small, but dead weight was different. He had to drag her across the sleek floor, careful not to leave a trail. By the time he reached the elevator leading to the private parking garage, sweat soaked through his shirt, but his movements were practiced, controlled. He loaded her into the trunk of his SUV, stacking the black bags neatly as if they were nothing more than bags of discarded produce. Then, he drove to his flagship restaurant. The building was dark, empty, just as he had planned. He parked near the back entrance, where there were no security cameras. He had designed it that way for privacy, never expecting it would one day serve a far darker purpose. One by one, he carried the bags inside, avoiding the main kitchen and heading straight for the industrial incinerator. It was meant for burning spoiled meat and organic waste, but tonight, it would serve him once again. He opened the hatch, and the fire roared to life. He felt the heat against his face as he fed in the first bag. The flames swallowed it whole, the plastic melting instantly. The scent of burning flesh hit him hard, but he didn't flinch. By the time he was finished, there was nothing left of Naomi but ash. When he returned home, he stood in the middle of their once beautiful kitchen, surveying the crime scene. There was blood in the grout, on the cabinets, tiny droplets even on the ceiling. He had to be thorough. With bleach and precision, he scrubbed until the kitchen gleamed once again. It took hours, but when he finally stepped back, there was no visible trace of what had happened. But he knew appearances weren't enough. He needed a story. The next morning, Elijah took to social media. His voice cracked at just the right moments as he filmed himself, eyes red-rimmed, his grief palpable. "My wife, Naomi, is missing," he announced, his expression devastated. "She left the apartment 2 nights ago, and no one has seen her since. If anyone has any information, please. I'm begging you. Help bring her home. He even offered a reward, something generous enough to keep the public invested, to flood his comments with prayers and sympathies. It was perfect. For 2 days, he played the role of the grieving husband flawlessly. He gave interviews, pleaded for Naomi's safe return. The world believed him. But the police didn't. The first crack in his story came when detectives began asking questions. Where had Naomi gone? Why had no one seen her leave? And why, after reviewing the security footage from their building, was there no sign of Naomi ever exiting the penthouse? There was, however, footage of Elijah carrying multiple heavy trash bags to his SUV. Driving to his restaurant in the dead of night. Returning hours later, alone. That was enough for them to get a search warrant. The first place they searched was the penthouse. Elijah had scrubbed well, but forensic luminol revealed the truth. Traces of Naomi's blood still clung to the kitchen tiles, invisible to the naked eye but glowing under forensic light. But that wasn't the most damning evidence. The real horror was waiting at his restaurant. Detectives combed through every inch of the kitchen. It was spotless, too clean. Elijah had tried to erase any sign of wrongdoing, but in the walk-in freezer, hidden behind rows of premium Wagyu beef, they found something that didn't belong. Packages. Wrapped neatly in butcher paper. Labeled with dates. When they opened them, the room fell into a stunned silence. Inside were dismembered body parts. Further forensic testing revealed the worst truth of all: the remains belonged to at least 5 different people. DNA confirmed their identities: young chefs, dishwashers, and line cooks who had once worked under Elijah before mysteriously vanishing. He hadn't just murdered them. He had butchered them. Then came the most disturbing theory of all. Investigators discovered traces of human remains inside the restaurant's industrial meat grinder. Authorities could never prove whether any of it had ended up in the restaurant's dishes, but the mere possibility sent a wave of nausea through the public. The world had once worshipped Elijah Langston as a culinary genius, a master of his craft. Now, they knew the truth. He wasn't just a predator. He was a monster. The restaurant was bustling, packed with diners eager to indulge in the renowned cuisine of Elijah Langston. Conversations hummed over candlelit tables, the aroma of seared meat and fresh herbs filling the air. But in an instant, the ambience shattered. The front doors swung open with force. Armed officers flooded the room, moving with precision, their presence demanding silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. At the center of it all, Elijah Langston stood behind the open kitchen, clad in his pristine white chef's coat, his face unreadable. A plate of freshly plated filet mignon sat untouched before him. "Elijah Langston, you are under arrest." The head detective's voice rang out, cutting through the stunned quiet. Elijah remained motionless, his jaw tightening, but his expression never wavered. He didn't protest, didn't ask why. He merely set down the knife he had been holding, wiped his hands on a linen towel, and turned toward them. Phones were already raised, recording the moment in real time as officers pulled his arms behind his back, cuffing him. The murmurs of disbelief turned into a frenzy, whispers racing from table to table. "Is this a joke?" someone muttered. Elijah, one of his sous chefs, stammered. But Elijah didn't offer an explanation. As cameras flashed and questions flew, "Did you kill Naomi? What about the bodies in your freezer?" He remained stone-faced. For the first time in his life, Elijah Langston had no control over the narrative. The arrest set off a media firestorm unlike anything in recent memory. News outlets ran the footage on an endless loop, the once revered chef being led out of his own restaurant in handcuffs, his face blank as if the weight of it all hadn't yet sunk in. Within hours, his empire collapsed. Reservations at his Michelin-starred restaurants were cancelled en masse. His reality cooking show was pulled from networks. His cookbooks, once bestsellers, were yanked from shelves, publishers scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. And then came the stories. One by one, former employees stepped forward. Anonymous whispers became loud, damning testimonies. Women and men alike told of Elijah's ruthless temper, his violent outbursts behind closed doors. Line cooks spoke of the relentless verbal abuse, the way he pushed them past exhaustion. But then, the stories grew darker. Some revealed years of coercion, young employees lured in by promises of mentorship, only to find themselves trapped under the power of a man who saw them as nothing more than disposable. Some vanished after rejecting him. Others endured, too afraid to leave. For the first time, the world saw Elijah Langston for what he truly was. A predator. A monster in a chef's coat. And soon, it was time to face justice. The trial became a national obsession. Spectators camped outside the courthouse for a glimpse of the proceedings. Cameras swarmed every entrance. True crime podcasts dissected every new revelation, every motion filed, every expression Elijah made in court. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The prosecution came out swinging. They painted Elijah as a sadistic narcissist, a man whose talent and charm had shielded his crimes for years. They laid out the gruesome details, the dismembered remains in the freezer, the industrial meat grinder coated in human tissue, the meticulous cleanup of Naomi's murder scene. They argued that Naomi had been his final mistake. She knew too much. She was ready to leave him. And Elijah Langston, the man who thrived on control, couldn't allow that. The defense scrambled. They claimed Elijah had acted in a moment of passion, that Naomi's rejection had sent him into an uncontrollable rage. They even attempted an insanity plea, arguing that years of pressure, expectation, and stress had finally snapped something inside him. But the evidence told a different story. Security footage. Forensic reports. The cold, calculated cover-up. And then there were the witnesses. One by one, they took the stand. Former employees, some trembling, some seething, all bearing the scars of what Elijah had done to them. They spoke of manipulation, of abuse, of co-workers who had mysteriously disappeared. A former sous chef recounted the day one of Elijah's favorites, a young woman barely out of culinary school, vanished without warning. He had asked where she had gone. Elijah had laughed. She wasn't the right fit, he had said. The weight of their testimonies crushed any remaining doubt. Elijah sat in silence through it all. No outbursts, no protests. If he felt any remorse, he never showed it. When the jury left to deliberate, the world braced itself for a long wait. It took them 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty. On all counts. First-degree murder. Multiple counts of sexual assault. 5 counts of homicide. The courtroom was electric, a storm of emotions swirling in the air. Some wept. Others clenched their fists in quiet satisfaction. Elijah's face remained unreadable as the words sank in. But the final blow came at sentencing. The judge, a seasoned man who had seen his fair share of monsters, didn't bother with pleasantries. He looked Elijah in the eye and delivered the words that would seal his fate. You, a man celebrated for nourishing people, took the life of the one person who truly loved you and slaughtered those who trusted you. You are beyond redemption. The sentence was brutal. 965 years. No possibility of parole. The weight of it rippled through the room. Gasps. Muted cries. The gavel slammed, final and absolute. And just like that, Elijah Langston, the culinary icon, the reality TV star, the man who once ruled the world of fine dining, was nothing more than a prisoner. His empire was gone. His restaurants were abandoned, the kitchens cold and empty. His name, once spoken with reverence, was now a whispered horror story. And as he was led away, shackled, his white chef's coat long replaced by an orange jumpsuit, he finally understood. There was no coming back from this case is a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind the most charming facades. Elijah Langston wasn't just a chef. He was a household name, a celebrated figure in the culinary world, a man millions trusted to bring them joy through food. But beneath the surface, behind the carefully curated image, lay something far more sinister. He didn't just crave success, he craved control. And when that control was threatened, he didn't hesitate to destroy anyone in his way. Naomi was supposed to be the love of his life. Instead, she became his final victim, paying the ultimate price for uncovering the truth. And she wasn't the only one. The young men who had worked under him, who had vanished without a trace, had all unknowingly walked into the hands of a predator wearing a chef's coat. The world watched as his empire crumbled, as his name was stripped from the restaurants that once bore it, as the truth of what he had done was laid bare for all to see. But the real horror wasn't just the crimes he committed. It was the fact that for years, no one saw him for what he truly was. Which raises the question, could Naomi have been saved if she had gone to the police first? If she had escaped before confronting him, before giving him the chance to silence her? Or was she doomed the moment she fell into his orbit? And more importantly, how do we recognize the warning signs when the people we admire hide their darkest secrets behind charm, talent, and power? How many more Elijah Langstons exist in the world, masked by success, waiting for the moment they can strike? If this story shocked you, like and subscribe for more cases that expose the darkest corners of human nature. Because sometimes, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones lurking in the shadows. They're the ones smiling at us from our TV screens, inviting us in, making us believe they could never be capable of such horrors, until it's too late.